You guys know how much I love CSS, and in this video we're going to be talking about CSS logical properties in the context of right, left, top, bottom, and I'll show you that with some examples. So let's jump straight in, and basically with a bit of a kind of pre-talk. Now, why is it important to do CSS logical properties? So, I mean, you got things like left, right, bottom, top, so that's when you apply things like padding, what border you want to select. You can use left, right, top, bottom, but the issue with that is that only works if your orientation is one specific way, and that's dependent on your language. So I speak English, and most languages go from left, I think whichever is left, to right. So in that one particular direction. Now, if you style things using left, right, top, bottom, that works. It works quite well. But the problem is, you're obviously building on the internet, and the internet is a global platform with lots of different languages. So if you consider things like Arabic and Hebrew, they go in the opposite direction. They go from right to left, and English goes from left to right. And I believe also, most of the languages from China and Japan, they go vertically. I believe that's not the case, but traditionally they go from top to bottom. And I believe they add from left versus, see Mongolian, it goes top bottom, but you add the ones to the right. So there's a variety of different orientations that you've got to consider with, different languages. And I think the old way of doing things, I used to use right, left, top, bottom, but I think we're better off just going using CSS logical properties, because that is what you intend to build in particular ways. And I'll show you that with an example. So we have this kind of quote here by Iago. If you want to add a bit of padding between Iago and the quote, I mean, you could use a flex box with gap, but just for the example here, we want to add a bit of padding next to Iago, just to give that breathing room between the character and what he says. And the orange here is just to indicate that space there. So obviously we wouldn't have it there, but on hover, it shows the orange there. And the old way of doing things is I would just add padding right, because it's on the right side here, you want to add a bit of padding there. Keep it simple, right? That works, but it starts to break down if you have different orientations, like different writing modes, and what I was talking about before, a different direction in the language. So currently it's left to right, which is the default, but if we were to switch that to right to left, and it's going to look a bit unusual in English, but you can imagine that's how we orientated for Arabic, for example. And the problem here is that we've got our padding onto the right. We've lost that space there, so it just looks a bit ugly, not what we intended. Now, the workaround for that is, instead of using padding right, we're going to use CSS logical properties, which is padding inline end, which is basically what we wanted. If you go back to our left to right example, they look exactly the same. But we go using padding inline end, and then if we do right to left, it's going to be positioned in that on the left-hand side now, but that's where we want it. We want to be at the end of this particular element. Now, if we go back to padding right, you'll see it break down even further with different writing modes. So let's say, for example, we make this vertical, and you'll see it's actually on the right side. We want to be, at the top here. If I just play around with other orientations, you'll see that it's the exact same thing, exact same problem. It's in a position on the right-hand side, but not where we want it in a different orientation. Now, if I switch this to padding inline, you'll see that it's actually located where we want to. Now it's on the top. If we go to vertical left, right, exactly the same thing. And if you do vertical right, left, and we can even change the orientation here. Now it's the bottom with the switching around of a direction there. So that's kind of what we intended here. Now, it's quite confusing going from, right, left, top, bottom, which is what makes intuitive sense, to switching to logical properties. So what I've done is I've created a table here, and this is kind of how I thought about it. So if we just consider, we've got a simple, the original setup where it's, the writing mode is horizontal, top, bottom, and then we've got our typical left to right orientation of the language. Scroll down here, I've sort of come up with a definition here, which is basically what the mapping is. It's obviously not exact if you're from a different country, or if you're using a different orientation, but basically, if you look at inline is basically the horizontal axis. When you type, this thing side to side of your words. Then you got your block, which is top and bottom. So if you want to isolate, for example, add padding to the sides, you would do padding dash inline, that's it. And they'll add padding just the sides or the horizontal axis. If you do padding block, or add padding to the top and bottom. So that's how you isolate those particular orientations or axes. And then start will be where we typically think it will be, the start of it, and the end will be at the end. So that's where we've got the mapping. Left is to inline start, right is to inline end, top is to the block start, and bottom is to the block end. That's how I'll map it in my mind because I speak English and I do horizontal orientation. You'll see here that I've kind of created a table. So hopefully this kind of really nails that point home with colors. So obviously if we change the direction of the language, you'll see that now we have right, or the classical is now on the, it's actually on the right hand side, but inline end is now on the left hand side because we'll swap the orientation of the language. And you'll see that if we change the actual writing mode, you'll see that top, bottom, left still maintains its position here because if you look at red, it's on the right hand side, but now because it's in the vertical right, left, that now becomes a top in an inline end. Now, and what I'll do, I'll link all this down below so you can have a play around yourself. Now, the next thing is how do we deal with, when you do position absolute, position sticky, you want that thing to be at the very top because there is top, right, left, bottom. There's equivalents to that as well, and they're basically mapped out here. So left is going to be inset, inline start, etc., etc. So what I recommend is reading the documentation by MDN on logical properties. Now you know about it, it exists, and it's in your kind of sphere. And I think it's a really good idea to implement these things because it's a good habit to get into. Like I wouldn't really use left, right, on top anymore. And I just use, unless you intend it to be on the right for everything, in most situations, you're better off just using logical properties. It'll get you on a good start. So even though you're just using, for example, English, if you decide to switch your application to a different language that has a different orientation or direction in writing language, then you kind of don't have to restart your application again. So that's why I think from the start, just start using the logical properties as opposed to the actual physical values. Cool. So I hope this helped you out, and happy coding.